2016 Connecticut Civic Health Index Report. And I'm very proud of this report. This is the second that we have released. We released the first one in 2011, and there's very much interesting data about our state in this report. I'd like to first, of course, thank our partners. First of all, my partner, Martha Mccoy, who you'll hear from in a minute, from Everyday Democracy. And also the many other people on our advisory committee, which has expanded over the last 4 or 5 years to include a number of different groups. I think there's about 50 people on the committee at this point, and a very active group. So thanks for their participation. Also, the people who have helped us put this report together, Data Haven, and you will be hearing from them later as they discuss the statistics that have come out in this very interesting report. And some of the people that helped us fund the report, the Campus Compact of Connecticut, Everyday Democracy, Wesleyan University, the Graustein Memorial Fund, the Fund for Greater Hartford, and National and Community Service Corporation. And our primary sponsor, who is the National Conference on Citizenship. I'd like to welcome Jeff Coates here today. You'll be hearing from him in a few minutes. And they are a nationally, congressionally chartered organization that has really put together these reports in a number of states across the country. And we are one of, I think, about 20? Almost 30 states now. Wow, we were one of about 16 in 2011, so it's greatly expanded, and I think it has proven to be very useful across the country. So thank you for being here, Jeff. I also want to welcome their representatives here from our congressional delegation. Most of our delegation were elsewhere today, so they will not be attending in person, but they are, as part of the congressional charter of the Council on Citizenship, also very involved in these kinds of reports. So what's this all about? What is the civic health of our state? Why are we doing this, and what is this? Why are we tracking these statistics? Well, the truth is we have tracked a lot of statistics over time about measures like economic measures, voting statistics, and that sort of thing. But we have now tried to find out more about social behavior and its connection to the way people relate to their government and their communities. So importantly, this report gives us a tool to develop new ways to encourage people to be involved in their democracy. Our underlying assumption is democracy is strongest when everyone participates and everyone's at the table. Without that broad level of involvement, the strength of our democracy is unsustainable. So we have a lot of data in the past on voting. Voting turnout, voting registration, and so forth. But of course, democracy doesn't begin and end with Election Day. It's far greater than that. And if you've seen the 2011 report, there was a lot of very interesting data where we try to connect the social behavior with the public behavior, because people are associating in lots of different ways. Association is a very important concept. And in American history, Americans are great associators. But what we have noticed, and this work began really with a book published by someone named Robert Putnam, who talked about bowling alone. And I know that became a very popular book maybe 20 years ago, which started looking at the way society was changing with the greater mobility, with new economic factors in our whole world, that American society was starting to change. So we're trying to look at some of those factors, and we'll have people here talking a lot about the statistics that we're looking at in this report and its correlation to the report we did in 2011. And I think the bottom line is that some things have stayed the same and some things have changed. As usual, there's a stark contrast in our state between the wealthy and the poor, the so-called two Connecticuts. It's as evident in civic behavior as it is in education and health and the many other factors that we have tracked. So despite a general high level of educational attainment in our state, people who are poor or who have lower levels of formal education participate less in our government at all levels, municipal level right up through the presidential level. This continues to be, I think, the primary challenge for our state. And we also see gaps in between old and young voters in terms of participation, not just in voting, but in all levels of association, whether they're working with neighbors on problems in their communities, or whether they're associating with religious organizations and that sort of thing. You do see another gap there among generally younger and older voters. So those are just some pieces of the many items of statistics you're going to see in this. I think there's a lot to get from it. We can use it in many different ways, and it will raise perhaps more questions than it answers. We can speculate on why these things are true. I prefer to look at this report as a blueprint for going forward and identify the things that, for example, in my office, we do look at voter registration, access to voting, what are the patterns out there, and see what we can do moving forward to decrease the gaps that we see and to make progress on some of these issues. So that's some of the reason that I've been involved in this work. I find it one of the most important things I'm doing, because I think too frequently in government we act on little information. Here we have a great source of data from which we can make some policy decisions, such as the one I just mentioned. So I'm very proud to have been working on this report. The advisory group has been tremendous, and I want to thank them for their work. And now I think I'll turn this over to my co-chair of the advisory committee and really one of the driving forces on this report, and that's Martha Mccoy. So Martha.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Secretary Merrill, and we're so honored to work with the Secretary of the State's office, with the National Conference on Citizenship and the Civic Health Advisory Group. It's been a tremendous amount of work, but it's also been a tremendous amount of fun and very meaningful. And as Secretary Merrill said, we all kind of know what we mean by our economic health. That kind of thing gets measured all the time. But sometimes when you raise the idea of what we mean by civic health, people could look at you a little blankly and wonder, what does that mean? And so I always say really to people that, simply put, it really is the state of our public well-being. And it's really, when we think about it, it's how we contribute as individuals and families to the common good. It's how we take that kind of individual or family action, for example, volunteering or charity, but it's also how well we connect with other people and how well we cross divides to work with people that we may not already know. So it goes all the way from sort of the family circle to the neighborhood and our close-in neighborhood, but also to our communities and our whole state. How well do we connect with other people? And really how we connect with and work with other people on problems in our everyday lives really forms the foundation for how our state can work. And so oftentimes we think of sort of like pre-political settings, like families, neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, faith communities, barbershops, book clubs, things that people participate in all the time. It really prepares us to find our voice and connect with others and to actually work to be heard. The other part of this that isn't always as much mentioned is, what is it that institutions in the state are doing to actually create supports for this kind of connection? And that could be governmental institutions like the Secretary of the State's office. It could also be local public officials, state public officials, and non-governmental organizations. So in a place that had good civic health, what we would see routine ways for people from all backgrounds to connect with each other, talk to each other, text each other, email each other, Twitter with each other. There would be routine ways for people to connect with each other in all sorts of ways, to have a deeper understanding of what they're facing in public life, what other people are facing, and then to work together to make a difference. And in a healthy civic culture, people of all backgrounds would feel welcomed to participate and would feel like their voice mattered. And so that's something that we believe very strongly with our advisory group, that with this report, we are working to create, as the Secretary said, a blueprint for moving forward. We're looking at something and saying, here's how we're doing. How can we do better? How can we build a civic infrastructure and civic habits of the heart here in Connecticut that have us working together more effectively as a state? And one of the reasons this is so important, and the National Conference on Citizenship has been really wonderful at highlighting this, is that research shows us that civic health is really critical to all other kinds of health in our state. For example, we know that civic health is directly related to how well we do in times of deep trouble, such as economic recession or when a natural disaster hits. If we have the bonds of trust to work with each other or to create opportunities for each other in those times, we will fare better. It's also very connected to how we tackle long-term problems such as disparities in opportunities for jobs, education, and healthcare. And so those are sort of what we might call the drip, drip, drip form of tragedy, which is that it's ongoing and often flies beneath our notice. And so our civic health will help us deal with those things. So I want to mention a couple of things. So we created the 2011 report, of course, not to sit on the shelf, but to spark action. And there's been a lot of action that's happened since then. A lot of it has been taken by members of the advisory group. There's been too much to talk about from here, but when you look at the report, you're going to see lots of great stories and examples. But there are also some things that the 2016 report highlights that we still need to work on, and I want to highlight a couple of those. One is that it highlights significant disparities in civic participation among Connecticut residents of ages 18 to 24 on one side and 25 and over on the other. And so this is a finding that challenges us to think about how we help young people of high school and college age, whether they're in college or not, find ways to connect and feel welcome to the civic life of the community. And the report also tells of some outstanding work that's happened in that regard in the last couple of years in particular. For example, just last year, close to 1,000 high school students in Greater Hartford participated in student-led conversations about mental health, not only the personal aspects, but also the public implications for how we create better supports for young people. And in fact, I'd like to recognize Angelica Moquette over here. Angelica, if you'll stand up, that would be great. Angelica is a senior at East Granby High School, and she's a member of the Connecticut Youth Forum Leadership Network. And she was a facilitator and participant in these dialogues, many of them which used text-guided conversations on mental health. And Angelica is continuing to play a leadership role in future student conversations and leadership development. So there's a lot to be done. There's a lot that's happening, but there's a lot still to do. Another thing I wanted to mention just briefly is that there is we also worked with a social studies teacher to develop a social studies curriculum that is being distributed through the Connecticut Council for the Social Studies in the coming year so that high school students can talk about the meaning of civic participation in their lives. I also want to mention a second kind of thing that the 2016 report highlights that's in some ways very similar to 2011 report and something we really need to pay attention to, and that's something that Secretary Merrill mentioned also, and that is how large gaps in income, education, and lines of economic and income gaps that fall along racial and ethnic lines continues to create not only opportunity gaps across our state and all sorts of ways that we live together, but also creates opportunity gaps in civic participation. And I'll also build on one of the comments the Secretary made about associators, because I want to be careful when we look at the statistics about who's participating in the state and who's not, because it's easy to say, oh, these people with more education or greater income are participating, and of course, you know, that makes sense, and we think of it as being a matter of people kind of making sure that they're good enough to participate. Or somehow that they've done it, as a matter of sort of their own kind of just because they're working hard or something like that. I want us to highlight what we know about civic participation, that often whenever we see disparities, we're really seeing disparities in barriers to participation, because really everyone wants to have a voice in the decisions that affect their lives. Everyone wants to be connected. Everyone wants to be heard by public officials. Everyone wants to play a role. The difference is who's being invited, who's being welcomed, who are the spaces being created for. And so when we look at the data, it's really important when we look at that data to pay careful attention, because as the Secretary said, when you look across, for example, Latino communities or African American communities or Asian American communities in our state, they are really, you're seeing a lot of associating. You're seeing a lot of group membership. You're seeing a lot of membership in faith communities, often more so than in the white communities. And so what we really are lacking in our state, and we're working on this, but we have to keep working on it, is creating those bridges between that form of informal or group joining association and being tapped into for having a voice in the public sphere. And for example, the presence of people on public commissions is a really critical part of that. Who feels welcomed and empowered to be part of those commissions? And we've made progress in the last few years on women being more greatly represented on state commissions, and that's great. But we still have a lot of progress to make when it comes to especially the Latino community, which is a huge part and growing part of our state, and also a very young part of our state. And so we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we create a civic infrastructure that is completely welcoming. And when we look at that data, we have to think about that number one predictor of participation, and that is someone was asked and welcomed. And so I just want to highlight that, because as we look at the data, it's important to put it in that context of the structural barriers and gaps that we face in the state of Connecticut. Our state is great, and it can be greater. And we have our work cut out for us and a great group of people working on it. So Everyday Democracy is really honored to be part of this partnership. We are committed to continuing this work, and also treating the 2016 report as also another report that's not going to just sit on a shelf, but actually provide a spark to action across the state. So having said that, I am very pleased to introduce and welcome Jeff Coates, who is the Director of Research and Evaluation at the National Conference on Citizenship. And I have to say that the National Conference on Citizenship has been an amazing national partner. They talk about Connecticut all over the country. And I think that's one of the least told stories in our state, is that we are setting an example for other states working on civic health, and the National Conference has been an amazing partner. So thank you, Jeff.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm the fortunate, or what many people think, the unfortunate person that actually looks at the several 100,000 pieces of data every year. I spend my entire workday playing with data. I do enjoy it though. I do it because I think data is the genesis for community change and civic renewal. And NCOC believes that as well. NCOC started the Civic Health Index in 2006 in an effort to educate Americans and to motivate their citizens, the leadership, and policymakers to make changes to strengthen civic health in their communities. Each year we work with multiple states and communities. As I mentioned earlier, we are now only up to about 40 communities and states. We work with 10 to 12 to 15 every year, as well as national reports, which were mentioned earlier, our economic report. This past year we put out a veterans report. We put out a Latino report, which was very big. And hopefully in the next year or so, I will be looking into the role and relationship between public health and civic health. I do have a master's in public health. I've been doing that for a long time, and I believe there is a strong correlation between the two. Civic health, the Civic Health Index measures the volunteering habits, the social connections, the political action trust and confidence in institutions, and individual community involvement. A state, since 2011, NCOC has been honored to work with Connecticut. I do, as I mentioned earlier, and as Martha mentioned, I speak a lot at these events and speak about Connecticut and the innovative formation of the Civic Advisory Board. This is one and only that I know of, and it has your work here, the formation of the group and the work has made great strides. You can see it in the data between 2011 and this current report. However, there's still a lot more work to be done. There's deep contrast in civic participation between certain subpopulations, as mentioned earlier. This report is a call to action. I believe the recommendations found in the report can and will be achieved because you have the tireless leadership of these two women up here and the great advisory group. I wanted to thank you all for joining us today, for being our partner at NCOC. And we at NCOC look forward to continuing to work with Everyday Democracy and the Office of the Secretary of State. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Now we're going to have an overview of the data. And to do that, we have Val Ramos, who's here with us and has really been the driver of this whole project. He's been managing, pulling the pieces together. So he works for Everyday Democracy and has really taken this on. So I think we have a slideshow to show you, and we'll go through the data now in a little more depth. So Val.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Secretary Merrill, Martha, and Jeff. Thanks so much for coming to join us here today, and all of you for being part of this event. We're very excited, of course, about the release of the report, and it's been a lot of work, raising the money, the funding for it, but also the actual writing, and we're very proud that Data Haven took on this task. They did a terrific job, I think, as you will see, as you see the report, and we have Mary Buchanan here, who is one of the project directors for Data Haven. She'll be talking a little bit about some of the data that was included, in particular the well-being survey. Okay, but I'm going to present a very short overview of the civic health data. For the most part, what you're going to see is the data that appears in the executive summary in the report. But I do also make reference to changes, improvements, and gaps where we lost ground, where we gained some ground in the data. So, and of course, the data is drawn from the Government Population Survey that is published by the Department of Labor in partnership with the U.S. Bureau of the Census, and that data, of course, it has a supplement. There's a supplement on volunteering, voting, civic engagement that is part of that survey, and that's where we draw the data points or the information for the report. So I'm going to start quickly, and one of the areas that we look at is to what extent are Connecticut residents engaging in service to and with fellow community members. And the data shows in 2013 that 27.8% of Connecticut residents volunteered. That was a 3.3% decline since 2010, however. I should mention that the margin of error is between 2 and 3% for, depending on the questions. So we can say that in terms of that, but also you can see there's still a decline. If we assume that it's a 3% margin of error, we still have seen some decline in that indicator. 27.8% again of Connecticut residents volunteered. Connecticut ranked 22nd in the country among the 50 states. To what extent are Connecticut residents joining organizations or groups that meet on a regular basis? In 2013, 35.1% of those surveyed indicated that they were members of a civic or community group. That was a slight decline of 1.8% since 2010. Connecticut ranked 36 in the country. That is actually a low ranking, which is why you see the sad face there. Uh, Social connectedness is an important part of civic health. To what extent do Connecticut residents trust, talk to, exchange favors with, and work with their neighbors in their communities? And Martha alluded to that earlier, how important that is, because the communities are really the cells of our organism, which is the state. So if nothing is happening at the local level, chances are very little or nothing is happening at the state level. So this is a very important question. To what extent are people exchanging gifts, contacting each other, talking to each other, and working together? The data offers some interesting, generally speaking, positive indications. In terms of trusting their neighbors, in 2013, 61.9% of Connecticut residents indicated that they trust their neighbors. Connecticut ranked 21st in the country, which is pretty good. Talking to their neighbors, 45.5%, and Connecticut did very well on that, also ranking 11th. That was a 2.6% gain compared to 2010 data. Exchanging favors with their neighbors frequently. That could be anything from exchanging a cup of sugar or, I don't know, babysitting maybe for an hour, depending on the children, of course. But nonetheless, I think 11.7%, not the best. So I think that that's an area where we can certainly improve. There was a 2.9% decline from 2010. In terms of political participation, and when people talk about civic health, more often than not, they think about voting, there's a whole range of different aspects of civic health. And in political participation, the same thing. To what extent are Connecticut residents voting, meeting with public officials, attending rallies and meetings, public meetings, talking about politics? These are all part of political participation. And the findings show that in some areas, Connecticut is doing okay, as you can see. In 2012, in the 2012 presidential election, 62.7% of Connecticut residents indicated that they voted, of course, eligible voters. That was a 4.5% decline from 2008. However, as you know, 2008 was a very unique presidential election year. So you can see that, from 2008 to 2012, there would be some decline. Connecticut still ranked 26 in the country. Voting in the 2012 local elections, which is an indicator that has been pretty recent, right?
Yeah, I just started in 2011.
2011. So we didn't have that indicator in the 2011 report, but now we have it here, which I think is very useful. In 2012, Connecticut residents, 63.5% of them indicated that they voted always or sometimes in a local election. Connecticut ranked 24th, which is not bad. We don't have data to look at gain or loss because it's a recent indicator. But voting in the midterms, 2014 midterm elections, 46.7% of Connecticut residents voted, and Connecticut ranked 19th. It was a slight decline, 2.6% from 2012, however. Now, there's other ways to participate, contacting, interacting with public officials. In 2012, among Connecticut residents, 10.5% attended public meetings. Connecticut ranked 19th in the country. And 13.8% contacted a public official. And again, Connecticut ranked 19th. So these are two areas where I think Connecticut is doing fairly well. The same also in terms of voting. Talking about politics, in 2013, among Connecticut residents, 27.8% talked with friends and family about politics. That was a 4.9% decline from 2011, and Connecticut did rank sort of in the middle, 29th in the country. In terms of charitable giving, to what extent are Connecticut residents donating $25 or more to social or charitable causes? In 2013, 56.2% of Connecticut residents donated $25 or more. And this has been an area where Connecticut actually has declined over the years, but we still ranked 12, and it was a 2.2% decline. So I think this is an area where we can certainly improve. Confidence, trust in institutions, this is a recent indicator, right, Jeff? Yeah. And for Connecticut, we didn't have this indicator in the 2011 report. So this is the first time that we have actually gauged or measured this Civic indicator. And as you can see, in 2013, 88.1% of Connecticut residents indicated that they have some or a great deal of confidence in their public schools, which is pretty good. Connecticut ranked 13th in the country. 59.2% indicated that they have some or a great deal of confidence in the media. Connecticut ranked 12th. In corporations, however, this is an area where I'm not surprised. 63.9% indicated that they had some or a great deal of confidence in corporations, and Connecticut ranked 36 in the country. So Martha alluded earlier to some disparities that exist. We like to call them opportunity gaps because there's always opportunity to address them and to bridge those gaps, if you will. So these are some evident disparities. You can see, obviously, that in the 2012 presidential election, Latinos voted far lower in terms of percentage than African Americans and whites, 47%. It's a low voting participation rate. Looking at pooled data from 2010, 11, and 13, volunteering, very similar indicator, 17% compared to 32 for whites. African Americans and Asian Americans about the same, 22%. Group membership in religious organizations. Here you see that's an area where Latinos do tend to participate more, but as you can see, still lagging a little bit behind African Americans, 25% for African Americans, and still Latinos in second place. That's not bad. So that's an area where Latinos do get involved, and I know because I've worked in Latino communities for many years, and church groups and organizations are really, in many cases, the heart of the community as far as how they engage members. In terms of school community groups, you can see that African Americans and Asian Americans have the higher level of participation of 25 and 20%. And then in terms of civic and service organizations, you see that white do tend to participate higher in those types of community groups, 10% compared to 3-4% for the other demographic groups. Disparities by age, we can see something that Martha mentioned, and I believe also Secretary Merrill mentioned as well. Younger demographic, members of the younger demographic, 18 to 24, tend to participate less in voting, as you can see in the 2012 presidential election, 39.8% compared to 65.9% for 25 and older. So there's clearly a major disparity there. In terms of local elections, very similar data, actually worse if you look at 29% compared to 67. Volunteering, you can see a little bit closer, 20% for 18 to 24-year-olds, 28% for 25 and older. And in attending public meetings, that's clearly an area where we need to work more, 2.1% for 18 to 24-year-olds and 11 for those 25 and older. This is just a quick summary of where we've gained some slight advantages. Working with neighbors, obviously, we gained at 1.3%, 2.6% talking to neighbors, and then contacting a public official, very, very slight improvement, and eating dinner with family frequently, 1.3%. Where we lost ground, you can see there's a lot more areas there. I think it really is a call for action for us to really address this, and you can see volunteering in particular, voting in the 2012 election, and talking about politics, the three major areas where we need to improve. So these are the areas that we should focus on, and both Secretary Merrill and Martha have highlighted those. Youth civic participation, which is why we were really committed to doing this project last year, the Connecticut Youth Conversations on Action on Mental Health, and we have Angelica and other high school youth participating. So we want to continue that kind of work as well. Latino voter education registration, those are important areas. We have members, the advisory group, who are very actively engaged in voting. We have Janil Teron, for example, who has served in Hartford Vota Coalition, and also the Hispanic Federation. So we're going to be working closely with those groups to continue the great work that they're doing. I think it's something that takes time, but we'll achieve some good results out of that. Joining civic and community groups, especially youth. That's an important area as well. And volunteering, of course, and exchanging favors with neighbors. So the next time you see your neighbor, just give them a cup of sugar or something like that. A little joke there. That's a good start. It's a good beginning. So that summarizes the the key indicators. There's a lot of other data, by the way, and I should mention that both Data Haven and the Connecticut Data Collaborative are going to be putting a lot of other data that came out of the research that is not necessarily featured in the report, these are subgroup indicators of all sorts. And so I encourage you to go to their sites, and Mary will talk about Data Haven, but let me just introduce her. Mary Buchanan, project manager for Data Haven and co-author of the report, and she'll talk about the well-being survey. Okay, thank you.
Right. Hello, everyone. I first want to thank Secretary Merrill, Everyday Democracy, NCOC, and the advisory group for letting Data Haven be involved in this process. Attention and improvements to civic health, as we know, builds communities and improves or creates cultures of collaboration and inclusion, which is really important, and we are honored to join this valuable process, which actually intersects with some of our own work, which Val has just alluded to. So our community well-being survey is an example of how groups within and across communities in Connecticut work together to bring attention to civic health. This past year, so in 2015, Data Haven engaged over 100 partners across the state from all different communities to implement a survey about quality of life. We were able to poll nearly 17,000 residents across the state of Connecticut from all 169 towns, which was very exciting and quite a process that gave us this really rich, full data set that has findings on economic health, public health, and civic health, which we know is very important. So the Community Wellbeing Survey tells a really detailed story. Because of its large sample size, it contains data on smaller groups of Connecticut residents, for example, different demographic groups, different age groups, and for populations within cities, regions, neighborhoods across the state. So this magnification really allows a deep investigation of where communities across the state really excel in offering high quality of life, and why Connecticut also comes up short in some indicators of civic health, as we have seen today. So the survey demonstrates large disparities in civic health by groups of people, reflecting and consistent with trends in the Civic Health Index report. I'd just like to discuss and highlight a few of the findings from the Connecticut Wellbeing Survey, which are, the data are, a few data points are in the Civic Health Report, but we also invite you to visit our website to look at some of the other findings that didn't make it into the report. So, for example, the survey finds very large disparities in civic health based on the type of community where people live. So we've heard discussion of the 2 Connecticut's. Data Haven has gone so far as to say there are 5 Connecticut's. Could probably break it down even more. But to compare residents of wealthy towns, mostly in Fairfield County, and residents of urban core neighborhoods, 95% of residents in wealthy Connecticut towns trust their neighbors. Just 62% of residents of urban core neighborhoods do, so that's a 33% gap. Of residents of wealthy towns, 92% thought that their neighbors could work together to solve a community issue, compared to 72% of residents of urban core neighborhoods. Residents of wealthy towns were 2 times more likely to believe that police did a good job keeping their towns safe compared to residents of urban core neighborhoods. So those are just a few examples. The Wellbeing Survey has additional questions that relate to civic health. And as Martha, Secretary Merrill, and others have said, civic health is associated with these other factors. And the benefit of our Wellbeing Survey is it's easier to kind of pull those threads together using the data. So again, you can find the results on our website. The link is provided there. ctdatahaven.org, and we really invite you to look at your own communities and look at how civic health is in your communities. So thank you again to everyone for involving us, and we hope you find the report useful.
Okay, so after we're done here, we will take some questions on the data. But first, I just wanted to point everyone to essentially our conclusion. And we want to sort of end with a call to action. There's also another interesting book by someone named Peter Levine, who's at Tufts University. And the title of the book is "We Are the Change We've Been Waiting For." I think that's a wonderful way to think about all this, rather than expecting any one group or person or official or anyone to make the changes. The idea is empowerment of everyone to be part of this. And so I think that's the challenge that I see, is that what can all of us do to make changes in some of these indicators? And what are we going to extract from the data that we're seeing before us that will kind of lead us to future action as well as what's already been happening? And when we published our first report in 2011, and we put together the advisory group that helped us kind of amass the information, I thought it was quite interesting that the advisory group didn't want to just stop. What they were activated by what they were learning, and they wanted to do something. And I think you'll see documented in several places some of the things that we have done, all of us, as a result of the information we found in our first report. I'll just talk a little bit about what I have done, and that is tried to advance the cause of access to voting and voting registration. And while I think the changes we've made in Connecticut, such as going to online voter registration and election day registration, and some of the things we've tried to advance in terms of making access to voting and registration easier, we have yet to see the results from that because many of those laws were passed in 2012 and 2013. But I do think, and I'm hoping, they will really increase particularly our voting registration numbers, which I think are much lower than they should be, frankly, for a state of the wealth that we have. And as you can see, economics and voting behavior are tied together. So I see that as a kind of call to action on my part to try to keep advancing, especially with groups that historically are feeling left out for various reasons, whether it's the minority community or people who have been disenfranchised by felony convictions. We have a large number of people in the state, and I know right now the Second Chance Society will result in many more people being released from prison, sent back into the communities. We want to make sure that we can reintegrate them in a public and civic life as well as every other way. So we should be reaching out to some of these groups of people to make sure they feel like they want to come vote, that they want to be registered to vote. So that's just one narrow piece of this, but I think all of us can do different things, and I think we've been made advances in civic education in Connecticut since our 2011 report. The social studies frameworks were passed. Some of this was languishing. We talked a lot to the State Board of Education about why civic education was important, and it was falling out of the curriculum because it wasn't on the tests. And so we've made a lot of progress in Connecticut on reinstituting some of the civic education, particularly at the elementary school level, where there was no real requirement that it be taught. So we made progress. People were working on a number of different fronts. We held many conversations. I know the old State House, for example, you'll see some information in here about the kinds of programs that they started putting on that attracted a large audience and kept people talking to each other about some of these issues. So I would consider this report more than anything a call to action, rather than, we could endlessly discuss the statistics, what they mean, why they say certain, what does this mean? Maybe they're relevant, maybe they aren't. But I think if we look at it more as I said at the beginning, a blueprint for future action and information that can inform policy decisions such as those on civic education or voting behavior, registration, the ease of registration and voting, I think it'll be a very productive report. And now I'd like to ask Martha if she'd like to wind up with any other comments, and then we'll take questions on the report while we still have the statistics people here. Thanks.
Thanks, Secretary Merrill. I'll just add a couple of things, and that is just thinking to the future. one of the key questions we have to keep asking ourselves is, how do we continue to build a culture of belonging and participation across the state of Connecticut? And that is a key question that we need to ask ourselves individually, but also in the institutions, any of the institutions and neighborhoods and groups that we're part of. Everyone has a role to play. And so as we move forward with this, we're really looking forward to just continuing to form relationships across the state, because it's amazing how when we've tapped people to say, are you interested in working on this? People say yes. And that's one of the great things about participation, I think, is that once people show up and get what you're talking about and feel that sense of what it means to connect with others and to have a voice and to actually kind of figure out what you're thinking as you're listening to other people and articulating your own thoughts and connecting in social ways and civic ways, then crossing divides becomes less daunting. It's not so abstract. It's not something that's like a pill you have to take. It's something that actually makes our community a better place. And so I think that's just looking forward. That's what we need. And this is a year that the divides are going to get a ton of attention. Political divides are going to make, people are very invested in convincing us that we really have nothing in common with people on the other side of the divide. And then we have a lot of work to do to say it's not only at election time, but every day in between. That's when we live in our communities. That's when we live in our state. That's where we need to work together and make a difference on the things that affect us every day. And so I'll close with that, and this will be a great time for some questions.
Two-part question. Well, not two parts. One question, two items. Two obstacles to greater involvement in local organizations, elections, etc., seem to be: one, I'm too busy. I have work. I have to drive the kids around. The other one is I don't need the aggravation, especially in this day and age. Social media, Facebook criticism, a local news site criticism, even harassing phone calls at home. Those are things I've heard from people who've been on local boards and commissions and got out of it for those two reasons. How do you cope with that? How do you encourage people that maybe it's not as bad as you think it is, or you're needed?
I'll start, and then other people can jump in. I want to sort of speak to the second one because I've had friends who've had those experiences of having some negative experiences, and I think those are very real obstacles. And it's one of those, I think, difficult but true things, which is that the more you can work in a particular place to use some of the civic tools that we know about to create a culture of participation, those voices of negativity become more apparently not the predominant voices. But I think this is one of the difficulties if people don't understand that there are others to tap into to have that experience of creating that collective culture that is more productive. So I think we need to tell a better job, do a better job of telling the story of how people have faced those kinds of obstacles and what their communities have done to support them and help surmount them. Because in a sense, when I look at that, and we're connected to groups all over the country, there are so many what I think of as civic heroes, who rode through some of that difficulty, but when they came out the other side because they had connected with other people in their community who helped them in a productive way, not silence those voices, but put them in perspective, then it made the community much stronger, because then people weren't living in fear of a few voices who were going to shut people down. So I think, especially in our day and age, we have a responsibility to support people who are trying to show their leadership in that way by bringing people together. Secretary Merrill, you want to add something about voting?
Steve, I think that's the challenge of our time in a way, because, when we say there's gaps between the poor people who don't vote and the rich people who do, it's a very real concern. The system maybe hasn't worked so well for them, and I can understand why they're discouraged and think that the system, is failing them. But it's still better to be able to vote for your leaders than not to be able to vote for your leaders. And I really do think an awful lot of it comes back to education. You know, I don't think we've done a very good job of educating citizens about what it means to participate and how to do it effectively. And yes, there are louder and louder voices out there, and especially I think that happens during, you know, relatively mean times, you know, but every 4 years there's an opportunity, and it's a presidential election, and everyone's paying attention. And I think that is this year is an opportunity to get people thinking about what they want to see in leaders and what our society's all about. And you're seeing it play out right now. That's why I want to take this as an opportunity to do, for example, an educational program I'm working on with the Department of Education, where we're going to try to recognize schools and children and teachers who are, you know, looking at community service, who are perhaps going to the polls with their parents, because we've seen in the past that, I don't know how many of you remember, I remember vividly the first time I was conscious of a presidential election. It was a big deal when you're a kid. And you know, accompanying your parent to the polls, or even saying, hey, Mom, are you going to vote? Those kinds of things make a difference. And, you know, children, you have to start young. And I'm not sure we've done a great job of that in the past, and I'd like to work on that. So we're going to start a program we're calling the Red, White, and Blue Schools, very much like we did Green Schools a number of years ago, the environmental recognition of environmental action. I think recognizing action where it's effective is the only way you can convince people that group action does make a difference. And in fact, it is the only thing that ever has. Anybody else?
Technical questions here.
Yeah.
I count about 18, 20 other sources, that studies and things that you base this on. Sound right about you guys? And I'm just trying to read through, oh, I see it. In the well-being survey, what's the margin of error on that?
Well-being survey for Connecticut.
I think you mentioned it earlier. But
So for the entire state, it's about 1%, but for the smaller groups, it's a bit larger, maybe 4%.
Huh?
Anything else? Yes.
Okay, so this one is okay.
Sure.
Okay, so going back to like this.
Oh, we're going to
man's
use a microphone. Hang on. Why don't you stand up and make sure you tell us your name and use the microphone. Go ahead.
I'm Angelica. Hey. Going back to this man's question, the first guy that asked the question, I like agree with everything that you guys were saying, but I think a lot of people, there's like a group of people that are meant to be leaders, like you guys. I couldn't do what you guys do, so much work. But at the same time, if somebody is not willing to put up with all that stress that goes along with the job, then they don't care about their community enough, because if they did, then all that wouldn't be a problem.
Okay, there's a view from the youth of the audience. Thanks very much. All right, well, if there are no further questions, thank you very much. We do have one more special event that we're tagging on to the end of this press conference, and that is we are about to award the National Association of Secretaries of State Medallion Award. And this is an award that I am offering on behalf of our state to, I can award up to 5 people in our state every year, a Medallion Award that's created to honor individuals, groups, or organizations with an established record of promoting the goals of NAS. And those are in the following areas: elections with special emphasis on voter participation, civic education, including teaching and studying of the subject, service to state government, specifically relating to the Office of the Secretaries of State, and a commitment to giving, a business or individual whose contributions have significantly enhanced the quality of life in our state. So this year, for the first time, we're awarding this award, and my first Medallion Award this year is going to Diane Smith. So, and she's here today to receive it. And let me just explain why I decided that I thought that Diane was the most worthy recipient of this award, especially the first one that I've made. You know, of course, Diane's many accomplishments are well known beyond Connecticut. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV journalist, documentary producer, radio talk show host, New York Times best-selling author and speaker. She won an Emmy for her journalism and co-authored a groundbreaking book on solving the American obesity crisis with MSNBC Morning Joe co-host Mika Brzezinski, among so many other things. But those of us who know her best know the dedication she has to Connecticut. She was a news reporter and anchor on WTNH TV in New Haven. She co-hosted the morning show on WTIC 1080. She's a frequent on-air contributor to Connecticut Public Television, producing and hosting award-winning documentaries and other programming, and she's published 6 books on Diane's Positively Connecticut TV series, the longest-running local TV series in state history. And I mostly know her as someone who cares about Connecticut and is constantly promoting the state and its people to everyone in every way she possibly can. She joined our advisory committee on this report and immediately went to work trying to promote the report, the ideas in the report, and really pushing us to do even more than we were doing. She's been part of the talk series down at the Old State House, and of course works all the time on CTN to promote Connecticut government, and all the other things that make this state wonderful. And that's why I think that she is the most worthy recipient of this. And so on behalf of our state, I want to thank you personally. We've known each other for many years, and I've seen all the things she's done. So thank you, Diane, for all you do for all of us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Here it is. Here it is.
Oh, that's
It says,
beautiful.
Diane Smith for promoting civic engagement and celebrating all that makes Connecticut special.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Secretary Merrill.
Good picture.
I just want to say one thing, and that is to thank you so much for this, and to really say that getting people engaged in our democracy is perhaps the most important thing we ever do inside this campus here. And I trace my dedication to that back to my grandmother. She was an immigrant from Poland. She came over here as a child, and as soon as she was able to, she registered to vote. And for years, she helped register other people in her community in Brooklyn, a community filled with immigrants, to vote. And she continued to do that every year, every election day, and in her final years of her life, she was a poll watcher up until she passed away in her late 80s. So she made it really clear to us that voting and being involved in your community was your privilege and your duty as an American, and that's kind of where I got that from. What I'm really fortunate about is that Secretary of State, the Civic Health Advisory Group, Connecticut Network, CTN, and the Old State House have really given me the opportunity to continue to follow that dedication and that passion. And I just had one thing I want to leave you with, and that was something that President Obama said in his State of the Union just a few days ago. And I want to quote from him, and I think that no matter where you stand in the political spectrum, if you believe in government, you believe in democracy, you have to think this was a good thing. And he said, "Changes in our political process, in not just who gets elected, but how they get elected, that will only happen when the American people demand it. It will depend on you. That's what's meant by a government of, by, and for the people. It's easier to be cynical," he said, "to accept that change is not possible, that politics is hopeless, and to believe that our voices and actions don't matter. We can't afford to go down that path. It won't deliver the economy we want or the security we want, but most of all, it contradicts everything that makes us the envy of the world. So," he said, "whatever you believe, whether you prefer one party or no party, our collective future depends on your willingness to uphold your obligation as a citizen, to vote, to speak out, to stand up for others, especially the weak, the vulnerable, knowing that each of us is only here because someone, somewhere, stood up for each of us." Thank you.
So thank you very much. It's a privilege, Diane. You're like one of our Connecticut treasures. All right, that concludes our press conference. Thank you all very much.